Hello everybody, my name is Elliot News and I'm the Biodiversity Officer for Kingston Council, and welcome to the next episode of Reading Nature. And these are sessions that we're running with the library service to encourage you to get outside and explore and try and learn more about the wildlife that also calls Kingston home. And today we're doing a slightly different type of episode because we're going to not be encouraging you to go out and explore a new park or new nature reserve. We're actually going to be talking about private gardens, and today we're standing in the heart of Berrylands and we're surrounded by suburban gardens, which is a typical sort of suburban landscape that you can find across the borough. And we're going to talk about a species that absolutely depends on our gardens for habitat, and that is a species that is one of the most regularly voted, one of the most popular mammals in the UK, and it is of course the hedgehog. And around the world we've got about 17 species of hedgehog, but the hedgehog that we have that's living in Kingston and across the UK is the European hedgehog. And when people think of hedgehogs, they typically think of the amazing spines and quills they have on their back. And a typical hedgehog will actually have about 5,000 or 7,000 individual quills, which is absolutely an amazing number. And they're made of keratin, and that is the same sort of material that makes our fingernails and our hair. And interestingly, when a hedgehog is happy, their quills will typically be lying flat over their sort of body, so they won't really pose a sort of threat. However, when they get grumpy or a little bit scared or unsettled, they actually use a muscle which is sort of like frowning. So it's a muscle that is attached just above their eyes and goes all the way back down to their tail. And then when they contract that muscle, that erects all these sort of quills and helps make them a bit more defensive against potential predators. And that's when they curl up in a ball, and they don't have like a fight or flight response like a lot of animals do. They just curl up in a ball and try and hope that their sort of quills will defend them from any potential danger. But unfortunately, hedgehogs are in mass decline across the UK. Since about the 1990s, we think we've lost about 2/3 of our hedgehogs. And since 2000, we've lost approximately 30% of our hedgehogs in the urban environment and about 50% in the rural environment, which is obviously really sad. But however, all is not lost, and we're actually looking at the trends within the urban environment, and we're seeing that decline start to level off, and that just demonstrates that our urban environment and our suburban environment can actually provide really important habitat for hedgehog survival into the future. So we can all do a lot to try and save these species. So why are hedgehogs in decline? For any species that's in decline, there's normally a lot of reasons that are perpetuating that sort of decline. And for hedgehogs, there are a number of factors, and one is habitat fragmentation. And what that means is they're sort of blocking the landscape, which is reducing the hedgehog's ability to move. And hedgehogs actually move a lot. So a typical hedgehog, a male, can go about a mile in one night. And what we say, a minimum population of hedgehogs, or sort of a minimum viable population, which is the amount of individuals you need to support a healthy hedgehog population, is about 32 hedgehogs. And they need to be in an environment that is about a kilometre squared. So that is quite a big space when you think about it. And if we're blocking that space up with fences and with roads, it's going to be very difficult for these hedgehogs to move around. And hedgehogs don't have territories, they actually just move around this sort of square kilometre landscape. And it's called mutual avoidance. So they try and avoid other hedgehogs that are in the area, but they don't try and fight them, they just try and keep themselves to themselves. So it's very important that they can be able to move around to find other hedgehogs, especially when it's mating time. So how can we try and help support hedgehogs move around the landscape? And there's one important thing we can all do if you have a garden. And that is, if you've got a garden with a fence, you can try and create a small little 13-centimetre hole in both of your fences to make it permeable to hedgehogs so they can move through. And this is something you could install. So this is sort of the size of hole that you want to create in your fence. So just the hedgehog can move through, and then it might potentially stay in your garden for the evening, or it may even hibernate there in the winter, because hedgehogs do hibernate. So this time of year, all our hedgehogs will be hibernating. So that is one really important thing that you can do, not only in your garden but in your streets, encouraging your neighbours to try and do the same. And of course, roads pose a really important big barrier to hedgehogs, really. So if they've got a busy road, there's a high likelihood that they won't be able to cross it, or if they do cross it, they might unfortunately get hit by a car that's travelling down it. So especially when we're driving around the suburban environment where there's gardens and parks and potentially good habitat for hedgehogs, it's really good to go slowly, so about 20 miles an hour or something like that, and then to be more vigilant against running over hedgehogs that will be trying to roam around. So it's not just important for people when you're driving around, but also look out for hedgehogs like that. Another issue that's an issue for hedgehogs, and a potential reason why they're declining, is loss of habitat. And since about World War II, we've lost about 300,000 kilometres of hedgerow, which is lots and lots of hedgerow. And obviously, it's no surprise that hedgehogs need hedges, because it's in the name. And hedges provide really important habitat for them to find insects to eat. So hedgehogs are insectivores primarily, so they'll go around. Their favourite food is worms and scurrying around and eating all sorts of creepy crawlies. And they also use it to try and collect leaf litter, to create sort of areas in which they can hibernate, and defend themselves and sort of hide away in the daytime. Because obviously hedgehogs are nocturnal, so if you see a hedgehog in the day, it probably might mean that it's a pretty ill hedgehog. So it's good to look out for. So to help us address this horrible habitat loss that has taken place over the last hundreds of years or so, there are lots of things that we can do to try and create new habitat to make our environment more friendly for hedgehogs. And especially if you are fortunate enough to have a garden, there's a whole range of things we can do. So for example, to address the loss of hedges that we've suffered, you could try and plant your own hedge, or have a hedge and make sure you look after the hedge that you've got, because it does provide important habitat, not just for hedgehogs, but also for things like birds and lots of invertebrates. We can also try and have like a wilder area in your garden where you have like maybe piles of sticks and twigs and maybe even some bramble and longer grass, which can provide a more sort of environmentally, ecologically friendly area of your garden, which can support things like invertebrates, which the hedgehogs would try and eat, and also environments in which they can try and hibernate and make a home. Also, another thing you can do in your garden if you have the opportunity is create a wildlife pond, because water is obviously really important for hedgehogs, especially in the summer months when it's really dry. But if you are going to build a wildlife pond, which is a great thing to do, please make sure when you do so, you have nice smooth edges that are quite shallow. So if the hedgehog does fall in there, they're good swimmers, they can swim, but you have to make sure they can be able to get out and scurry out. So make sure your wildlife pond will be friendly for hedgehogs. And especially in the winter months like now, when hedgehogs are hibernating, you can build an amazing structure like this, if you're so keen, which is a hedgehog house. And this is an environment where a hedgehog can go in here, can go and take leaves and nice bedding for it to sort of hibernate in. And this means in the winter months, it'll be able to hibernate in a relatively safe environment, away from predation risks from things like cats and stuff like that. So these again could be really great additions to your garden if you want to get one in there. And again, through the summer months, when there might be limited food availability, you can put out food for hedgehogs. But it's very important that you don't put out milk, because lots of people want to put out milk for hedgehogs, but I don't quite understand, because milk is actually very toxic to hedgehogs. They're all lactose intolerant, so if you give them milk, they're going to get very poorly and might even result in them dying, which would be no good. So that is something that I very much would ask you not to do. Best thing to put out for hedgehogs is, if you haven't got a wildlife pond, a small bowl of water would be great, and then also things like dog food are perfect, because hedgehogs effectively are insectivores and meat eaters, so that is a perfect sort of food to provide hedgehogs through the summer months. And then people might worry, if they're getting hedgehogs into their garden, that you might be increasing the likelihood that you might be giving ticks to your dogs or your cats, because sometimes you see a hedgehog and it has ticks on it. And actually, all the hedgehog ticks that you'll find on a hedgehog can only live on the back of a hedgehog. They can't jump onto your dog or your cat or anything like that, so they won't pose any sort of disease risk to your pets. So that is nothing to worry about. So especially in the summer months or something, and then you're in the daytime and you're walking around your garden or even the park, and you see a hedgehog walking around in the day, that's probably going to mean that the hedgehog is in a pretty poor state. So the best thing you can do in that case, especially if it's in your garden, is get hold of organisations like the Hedgehog Preservation Society, who'll be able to give you advice of where to take the hedgehog to, and some guidance on what to do But in the meantime, before you get in touch with the Hedgehog Preservation Society, what you can do is put some garden gloves on and pick the hedgehog up, put it in a nice dry box with some nice soft bedding, with a bit of water potentially and a bit of food, and just make sure it's a nice quiet place while it can just be in a sort of safe space while you try and work out what to do with the hedgehog. Another reason for hedgehog decline or another factor a lot of people sort of say is a reason for hedgehog decline, is badgers are in the landscape. And it is true, badgers do predate against hedgehogs. They actually have a very interesting relationship with hedgehogs. It's called an asymmetrical intra-guild predatory relationship. And basically what that means, when a hedgehog and a badger, they both love eating worms and invertebrates and stuff, so they have to compete for the same food. So there's always going to be a bit of competition for food, and obviously badgers are a bit bigger and stronger than hedgehogs, so they might be able to eat the food more successfully than hedgehogs. So if there's a lack of food in the environment, the badgers are probably going to profit more so than the hedgehogs, just because of their sort of stronger creatures to do so. And also they can occasionally predate against hedgehogs, which is a natural sort of occurrence that happens in the natural world. We know there are predator-prey relationships with creatures across the planet. So hedgehogs and badgers have actually coexisted for potentially millions and millions of years. So there is a relationship there, and it's only really a problem when there's lots of other factors which make it difficult for the hedgehogs to live. So if there is a fragmented environment with poor habitat availability, not enough food, that is when badgers might be a problem. So badgers aren't the reason for hedgehog decline, because there has been a long evolutionary relationship there. So hopefully you now know some good tips for you to improve your garden for hedgehogs. And the best thing about that, the hedgehog will work as an umbrella for lots of other creatures. So if your garden is good for hedgehogs, it'll also be good for lots of other wildlife too.